Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series on litigation landscape under GST. We hope you and your families are safe and healthy. Uh, though Unlock 1.0 has begun in India, but number of cases are also significantly increasing. Unfortunately, India ranks 7th in the world in terms of COVID-19 cases. This has indeed big impact on Indian economy, and we hope things are normal very soon. Coming to today's topic, uh, indeed, we have one of the highest participation amongst our webinars till date. Seems just like us, you all of you are also hoping that the litigation under GST will be significantly higher than erstwhile indirect tax regime. And as the country is seeing Unlock 1.0 from a COVID-19 perspective, unfortunately, we also expect that we'll have one Unlock 1.0 from a GST litigation perspective as well, as most all of you would have already filed GST audit, annual returns, 2017-18 statements. We have seen inquiries being now undertaken by authorities, and even in some cases, show cause notices also are getting issued. So the whole perspective of organizing this series was that we wanted to make all of you aware that which are the major areas of dispute which are likely to come on in GST. Uh, uh, in some of the areas, if there are any measures you can undertake to avoid litigation, we have stitched that also along with the issues, including the relevance of pre-GST laws in this respect, because on many of the issues we have seen, and you will also observe that there is a significant relevance of pre-GST laws in today's times. So coming to the series, the first two sessions in the series will be relating to substantive law. Today we'll be covering mainly on the output side, and in the second session we'll be covering majorly on the input side. The third session will be more on the assessments, departmental audits, and litigation procedures, which in many ways are different than pre-GST regime. Now, with this, we start our session. Yes, so this is the journey of GST till now. And if you see, the road ahead looks hazy and full of fog. We are almost on the verge of 3 years of completion of GST. GST was supposed to be a good and simple tax, but is it actually so? So we'll start with the Prime Minister's speech in the Parliament when the GST was launched, where he said that today, due to transparency of GST, due to technologically proven trial, gray areas are ending. GST has an inherent strength of eliminating the possibility of ordinary businessmen being harassed by the officers. This is what the Prime Minister intended when GST was launched, but unfortunately, we are far away from that. We expect the litigations to be almost at same levels as pre-GST. So the major objective of GST being a simple law seems to have been defeated till now. And the reasons are, till date, we have 750 plus notifications being issued, 450 circulars being issued, 1000 plus advanced rulings, where 95% are pro-revenue. We have till date 500 plus High Court and Supreme Court rulings, majorly on Tran-1 e-way bill issues. Multiple retrospective amendments already made within 3 years. Even otherwise, government keeps making continuous changes in the law. And GST portal continues to have major technology issues. So both on the law as well as implementation side, we have significant challenges, and we feel that the GST will be full of litigations. So with this, we commence our series, and I will be accompanied by two of my colleagues, Dharmendra Rana, he is a partner in our firm, and Saurabh Kumar, he is a senior associate in our firm. So I hand over the session to Saurabh now, who will run us through the various issues of the first webinar. Over to you, Saurabh.
So thank you, Puneet. I'll be taking this forward. Good afternoon, everyone. Before adverting to the substantive part of our webinar today, I must highlight here that primarily under GST, there are three reasons that have led to emergence of disputes or any jurisprudence. They are primarily the paradigm shift from the manual interface that was there in the erstwhile laws to the electronic interface that is there in the GST. Like claiming of ITC, maintenance of SENVAT register, all was manual earlier. Now it has been made online as electronic credit ledger. And this has led to certain disputes like technical glitches, etc., which is basically arising out of this adapting to the new mechanism, this new regime of electronic dealing with department as well as other issues. The second would be the filing of advanced ruling applications. They are proactive litigations by the taxpayers, but yes, they do show us the bent of revenue in understanding a particular provision, and also shapes of the future disputes that will come up due to all these interpretations that have been adopted. Now, thirdly would be the challenge to certain provisions which have been tested before the constitutional courts. We'll be dealing with that specifically here also, and wherever our topics are listed in the second webinar or the third webinar. Now, with this background, I now come on to the first topic, that is transitional provisions under GST. Now, under transitional provisions, we saw the first sign of disputes that have emerged under GST, and naturally so. Why? Because the taxpayers, after migration of registration, had to undertake carrying forward of the erstwhile credits that were lying unutilized in their last return filed as on June 30th, 2017. Now, that led to certain disputes. Now, Section 140 of the CGST Act provided for certain provisions of carrying forward the credit of lying unutilized in the last return, and in a prescribed manner. So this manner was prescribed under Rule 117, which provided for electronic filing of a Form GST Tran 1, and a prescription of time limit of 90 days, which got further extended to December 27, 2017, being the last date. And this never remained sacrosanct because of the unpreparedness by the government that was shown in launching the GST common portal. Now, this, despite the passing of the dates of the last date of filing the Form GST Tran 1, there were certain taxpayers, or rather a lot of taxpayers, faced the issue of technical glitches in carrying forward this credit on GST common portal, as well as there were certain manual misses and they could not carry it forward under GST. Now, to cater to that, Rule 117(1)(a) was brought into place, which empowered Commissioner to grant relief to all those taxpayers who faced technical glitches and could not carry it forward under GST. So, since the disputes were not resolving, several high courts came up with different grounds, and taxpayers reached there before Gujarat High Court, before Punjab and Haryana High Court, Delhi High Court, etc. There, the taxpayers challenged this Rule 117 only on the premise that the time limit prescribed under a notification or a rule is invalid because the statute itself does not give it a power. Also, Article 300A provides for a property right to any person in India, and credit being a property right as held by several Supreme Court judgments, one of which being the Scots Limited, that it is a vested property right and it cannot be taken merely by way of a time limit being prescribed under the rules. So while that, the Punjab and Haryana High Court, Delhi High Court, Gujarat High Court took a view in favor of the taxpayers, but Mumbai High Court took a different view. So there were rulings there was varied jurisprudence till date, and the taxpayers had to face several issues. Now, with an intent to solve this problem and also not to make this vested right a perpetual right, Brand Equity Treaties judgment by Delhi High Court recently answered these questions which were posed to them, and it held that technical difficulty, which is Rule 117(1)(a) created a classification between a taxpayers having a technical problem versus a taxpayers having a manual problem is not reasonable. The purpose of Rule 117(1)(a) is to grant protection to taxpayers' credit only, and it should be allowed universally to all of them. Now, again, it reiterated the position that Article 300A of the Constitution of India provides for our property right, and credit is a property right. Therefore, it cannot be taken away. Now, this filing mechanism is only procedural and directly in nature, and it cannot be there to take away the substantive right to avail credit. Now, the most important fact, the most important law that was laid down under Brand Equity Treaties judgment was credit is a civil rights, and generally to enforce a civil right, Limitation Act provides for a period of 3 years from the date of cause of action. So that should be a reasonable approach, because the time limit has not remained a sacrosanct. So that should be a reasonable approach wherein the taxpayers can claim the credit by 3 years, that is ending on June 30th, 2020. At the same time, this will also end to the perpetual claiming of credit because this is termed as transitional provision, and this has to come to an end at some point of time. Now, based on this judgment, taxpayers can now file Tran 1 till June 30th, 2020. This department a letter can be filed before the department to open the common portal for electronic filing or accepting manual filing. We must highlight here that there has been an amendment in under law from 18th May onwards, which is a retrospective amendment which is applicable right from July 1, 2017, which now has empowered Section 140 to state that time limit can be prescribed under rules. So the retrospective amendment naturally has overruled the brand equity judgments to certain extent only, while all other grounds will remain sacrosanct here. So with this, I'll just request Puneet to share his views on this judgment on Tran 1 issues.
Yeah. So yes, indeed, this is a last opportunity for all of us if there were Tran 1 issues or if we have missed any credits. So June 30th is the last date. We should file a manual Tran 1 because electronic Tran 1 government is not permitting. In any case, the revenue is going to Supreme Court against brand equity judgment. One very interesting fact I want to tell that even after retrospective amendment in Section 140, last week we argued another Tran 1 matter before Delhi High Court only. And even though the court has reserved its judgment, but the feelers which we got from the court was that irrespective of the retrospective amendment, the brand equity judgment lays down the correct law. So they are likely to grant the relief. So I only wish to highlight that this is a last opportunity, just few days left. So if you have missed any credits, please take advantage of this ruling.
Yes, so with this, we move on to our next slide, and that is also related to transitional credit of cesses. Now, from the period 2007 to 2015, there were certain cesses which were imposed, like education cess on excise duty and service tax, secondary higher education cess, Krishi Kalyan cess. These cesses were SENVAT credit as per Rule 3 of the SENVAT credit rules earlier, so they were allowed to be availed as well as utilized against such cesses only. Now, these cesses got subsumed under in the service tax or got abolished from the period during the period 2015 to 17, and during that period there was though the subsumption happened or the abolition happened, there was no lapsing provision for such cesses. So it all kept lying in the service tax return or excise return that was filed during the erstwhile period till June 30th, 2017. Now, Section 140 Clause 1 provided that credit of transition of SENVAT credit shall be allowed. So SENVAT credit included cesses. So there were several assessors who felt that these cesses can be carried forward under GST. So therefore, this issue was brought before the Madras High Court in Sutherland Global Services. It held that there was no specific provision for lapsing of credit, and therefore it shall not lapse. in fact, the section 140 clause 1 is only allowing such transition of credits, and there is no bar into the for the same. All the conditions that had been specified under section 140 stand satisfied. Therefore, there is no reason to deny the credit of cesses to the taxpayers. Finally, they held that the transition of credit of cesses was allowed. This was a single bench judgment. While this was pending, there were certain amendments made under law to specifically exclude the cesses. In our view, such amendments do not still apply to section 140 clause 1 in transitioning all these credits which were lying unutilized in the return. While that's so, we believe the Madras High Court division bench, there was an appeal by the department, and the Madras High Court stayed this order. So now the proceedings are pending for their the final adjudication, and the fate of cesses being carried forward still remains in the hands of Madras High Court yet, while the legislature still intends not to carry it forward. So, Puneet, do you have any thoughts on the same?
Yeah. So, Saurabh, you rightly mentioned that even after the so-called retrospective amendment, the legal fallacy has still not been corrected. So, in our view, as the law stands today, you can surely carry forward the credit of the cesses. And secondly, because this brand equity judgment has already given time limit till June 30th, so if any of you have not carried forward the cesses, you can file a manual tran one, at least for the cesses. So in our view, you can carry forward the cesses. Yeah.
So with this, we come to an end of the first topic, that is transitional credits. There have been several disputes, but we are covering the most important ones. So with this, we now move on to our next topic, that is EPCG and advance authorization. Now these schemes are provided by the Foreign Trade Policy 2015 to 2020, which is changed every 5 years by the central government, stating their foreign trade policy going forward. And these are incentive schemes for certain importers and exporters, and these are provided there. Upon advent of GST, there was a requirement of alignment of all the allied laws in the new regime of the GST, because customs act, customs duty, etc., gets impacted, and also there is an implication of GST on imports. So these gets impacted. So therefore, requirement to change these laws. So April 2015, this EPCG policy was implemented. That was brought under the Foreign Trade Policy of 2015 to 2020, and this EPCG scheme provides for import of capital goods without payment of any duty, customs duty, or additional custom duty only. Also, that was given through an exemption notification that came under in the year 2015 only. Now, post GST, what happened was there was this importation on payment of GST and was only allowed, and there was no amendment made under the relevant notification which provided for EPCG exemptions. The DGFT trade notice also said that there shall be ITC allowed on such IGST payment on import of capital goods. This was retracting from their earlier scheme, promises that was made during implementation of the EPCG scheme. So there were certain things were put before the government, which was then the final amendment took place in October 2017, where under the exemption from IGST payment was reinstated again. Now, the question that remained was whether the period July 1 to 2017 till the period the exemption was granted, whether during that period IGST exemption shall still be allowed or not. So the question reached before the Gujarat High Court again. In Spintex, it said that the government has brought this amendment, which is only curative in nature, and it is only clarificatory, and therefore it shall be construed retrospectively from July 1, 2017. Therefore, the benefit was made available to the taxpayers, that is the importers. Now, similar scheme is advance authorization scheme. They had to run all together under GST as well, but we faced similar issue under advance authorization scheme too. Again, this was brought under April 2015 with the Foreign Trade Policy 2015 to 2020. This scheme is for importation of input duty free, which has to be subsequently incorporated in the export goods and has to be exported, and export obligations has to be fulfilled. Now, there was no, again, post GST, there was no amendment which was made, which was again represented by the industry, and the amendment came on the same date as EPCG amendment, that is October 2017, 13th October. They introduced the exemption for IGST, but there was a pre-import condition which was imposed. Now, what is this pre-import condition was not defined under the foreign trade policy or the notification which was issued thereunder. DRI started initiated certain investigations and started calling for documents and data of imports made during this period. And they interpreted this to mean that the first goods have to be imported into the country, then they have to be incorporated in the export goods, and then the export goods have to be sent back or have to be finally exported. So the idea was that every importer has to fulfill a pre-import condition to avail IGST exemption, and see what absurd result it is posing, that on BCD exemption there is no such condition, but on IGST exemption the same goods are facing a separate condition altogether. Now pre-import condition has been withdrawn, but during this validity of such condition was also challenged before Maxim Tubes in Gujarat High Court. Earlier Vedanta Limited in Madras High Court had held that this pre-import condition is correct and it is the policy of the government to have it and to imply that, but the Gujarat High Court held that this is not a reasonable condition and it is not in consonance with the advance authorization scheme itself. Why? Because this will lead to absurd results. Why? Because there are orders, time-bound orders within for the importers to take care of. And once, if we see, the judgment also took note of the time period that takes in claiming an advance authorization scheme and then importing goods and then exporting it back. It takes at least 6 months. So this leads to an unreasonable result, and therefore this pre-import condition was held to be invalid. So with this, we now move on to our third topic, that is the constitutional validity. Constitutional validity under GST, and was naturally so, was challenged for several provisions, but we'll be dealing with certain important ones, and the most important is the constitutionality of GSTAT. Now there was tribunal under erstwhile laws also, that is Custom Excise Service Tax Appellate Tribunal. There was composition of, there was one technical member, one judicial member, which were passing orders there under. Now under constitution there are three organs, legislature, judiciary and executive. And it is a settled principle of the constitution that no organ shall interfere in the functionality of each others. On this, there have been several judgments also, that judiciary cannot interfere in legislature, legislature cannot interfere in judiciary. Now this case law is entirely based on this principle only. Revenue Bar Association, Madras High Court was challenged this constitutionality of GSTAT on primarily three premises. Firstly, that technical members are 2 in number, which are outnumbering the judicial members, which are only 1 in number, as the decision will be taken on majority. Second would be the members of Indian legal services, which are essentially a government wing and executive wing, were made eligible to become a judicial member before the CSTAT. And thirdly, that exclusion of advocates from being appointed as judicial members, which is a departure from the earlier scheme. That is under ITAT, advocates have been considered to become a judicial member. Under the CSTAT also, the same position was there. Now, Madras High Court held that and relied upon R. Gandhi's case, which dealt with constitutionality of company law tribunals, company law appellate tribunals, which had similar position, that the technical members were outnumbering the judicial members. So the High Court held that technical members can never be in majority. Why? Because GSTAT exercises judicial functions, and in exercise of judicial functions, only a judicial mind is appreciated. It can appreciate the order from the lower forum, lower authority, and a sound reason and judicial reasoned order shall be passed, and that's a necessity in every judicial proceeding. Secondly, Indian legal services, members of Indian legal services being made judicial members was already declared to be unconstitutional in R. Gandhi's case. So was the case in Revenue Bar Association, which only followed. Third was exclusion of advocates, which was said not to be unconstitutional on this basis. Why? Because advocates do not have a right of their own to claim it as a matter of right, that they can become a judicial member. But yes, it is a departure from this scheme. Therefore, it was directed that these judicial members, advocates, shall be considered for such purposes, and there shall be a law made to that extent. Now, since this led to certain problems, because there are already orders being passed by Commissioner Appeals and Commissioner also, so there was an order issued by Commissioner GST, which extended the limitation for filing of appeals before GSTAT to later of the following dates, that is date of communication of order or the constitution of GSTAT itself. So the time clock for limitation will start only after GSTAT is notified to be operational, and before that the appeals can be put on hold and the limitation clock will not run. So Puneet, do you have any thoughts on this slide?
Yeah, so indeed, so the whole GSTAT has gone in limbo. Few days back, there was a Rajasthan High Court judgment, even though it was an interim order in case of JVS Foods, in which they state the constitution of Advanced Ruling Authority, because just like GSTAT, in Advanced Ruling Authority, there is no judicial member at all. There is one commissioner from center and another from state. So the High Court stayed the operation of Advanced Ruling Order on this ground. So if you see the sections which we have covered till now, be it transition of credits, be it foreign trade policy continuations, be it the whole formation of GSTAT or the Advanced Ruling Authority, the whole foundation of GST is very weak, especially from a legal perspective. So in our view, this itself is a clear indicator that the road ahead is likely to be very, very bumpy. And Saurabh, you can continue. After this, we'll move to, after covering all these transitional and constitutionality issues, we'll move to the taxability related issues. Yeah, over to you, Saurabh. Yeah.
Yes, Puneet. So now taxability entails these four elements. So in any indirect tax statutes, this it requires four elements to be mandatorily present into it. One is the taxable event, which under GST is supply, and it is amalgamation of all those event-based taxes which were there under before the GST, that is excise duty on manufacture and provision of service tax on provision of services. Secondly, person liable to pay tax has to be fixed. Under GST, supplier has been made the person liable to tax, while the central government is also authorized to make any recipient liable to tax. We'll deal with any other person also have been made taxable under GST, which will be dealing in the subsequent slides. Third is rate of tax, which is issued by the central government has already undergone several changes. And the fourth is value on which rate is applied to compute tax liability. Now, in any of these elements are not present for any transaction, the levy itself will be fail and will not be levied on that particular transaction. So with this background, we now move on to the definition of supply under Section 7, very broadly defined, has an inclusive definition. It includes all forms of supply in the course or furtherance of business for a consideration. It also deems import of services for consideration, whether or not it is in the course or furtherance of business. Thirdly, certain activities which have been made supply even without consideration under Schedule 1, like supply between distinct persons. Now, there are certain exclusions which the central government is empowered to do so, as also under Schedule 3, there are certain exclusions like services by employee to employer in course of employment has been excluded from the ambit of Section 7. So with this, we now move on to the key issues which we'll be dealing with under the taxability head. The first topic which we'll be dealing is the supply between distinct person. It is a novel issue and novel concept under GST, and it has already seen its fair share of confusions. Now, the second is a legacy issue, liquidated damages and toleration of an act, and has faced its fair share of disputes under the service tax regime also on notice pay recoveries, etc. Ocean freight is again disputable in the service tax regime also, and as also in the GST regime, this has been held to be unconstitutional. The next one would be the composite versus mixed supply. Again, this issue has been a legacy issue which has been carried forward under GST. Under the service tax regime also, this has faced its fair share of disputes. Works contract has historically been, since 1976 and before, has historically been a matter of contention, but in GST, the scope of works contract has been slightly reduced. We'll subsequently deal with in detail the rulings which have come under works contract. Now, distinct person is a concept which has been introduced under the GST. Section 25(4) says that each registration in itself is a different and distinct person, and the transaction between them shall be on an arm's length price. Schedule 1 provides that it is a deemed supply even if it is without consideration. And there is a contesting entry which the taxpayers and advance rulings have faced. We'll discuss in detail the transaction between employee to employer. Now, in the case of Columbia Asia Hospitals, there were several hospitals units in several states. Head office was in Karnataka, while there were certain branches in different states. These branches and the head office were working together. Head office had certain employees which were doing the accounting services, administrative services, and management support to all the branches as a whole. That is, as a company as a whole. Now, the question before the advance ruling authority was whether the employee cost which are working for the which are working for the company as a whole from the head office shall be charged to tax, or shall that be termed as a supply in itself. So the AR held that each registration is treated as distinct person. It upheld that supply to a distinct person without consideration also would amount to a supply only, and it is chargeable to GST and duly covered under Schedule 1. Now, the advance ruling lost sight that company does not, an employee rather does not function for a branch, it functions for a whole company, and there cannot be services by an employee at head office to a branch office. And this thought was basically lost sight of. But while we'll deal with Habufa Maybelline and Taco Holding in these cases, the facts were slightly different, but it lays down an important point of law. There was a head office outside India, and there was liaison office. Liaison office was operating in India under the RBI guidelines as a liaison office. There was no trading from that office. There was no independent revenue also. So only the employee cost, etc., and the office running cost were getting charged to the head office, which was located outside India. Now, the question that came before the advance ruling was precisely that whether this charging of expenses shall be considered to be a service in itself, and whether there is a requirement to take GST registration under law or not. Now, Habufa Maybelline took a correct view that there is service as defined under the CGST Act provides that it should be anything other than goods, but it should be for a separate consideration and in lieu of that service. So there was no separate consideration at all, and this was only reimbursement of expenses of the liaison office. So the AR held that it cannot be treated as distinct persons, and there cannot be an activity to self, and this cannot be termed as a service because service requires at least presence of two persons, one the recipient, one the supplier. Now with this, we now move on to the next slide, which provides for certain positions under the erstwhile laws. In Tech Mahindra KPITQ means the facts were squarely similar as under the Habufa Maybelline case, and it also said that employee of branches are employees of company only. Branches cannot survive without head office, and no provision of service can take place between head office and branch, because it is essentially a service to self, and company, head office and branches cannot be termed as two different persons altogether. Now with this, Puneet, do you have any thoughts on distinct persons?
Yes. So Saurabh, you rightly mentioned that the jurisprudence under previous law, it lays down the right principle, and this is basically a principle of mutuality. Like this principle first came in income tax, like in respect of club and members. So same way, in employees of a company, whether located at two locations, they cannot be held to be providing services to other. And unfortunately, there are two set of advance rulings for branch offices. The Columbia Asia said that it is a service, but when project offices, these Rajasthan advance rulings came, they said it is not a service. This issue has been repeatedly represented before GST Council, and they were supposed to issue a circular long back in 2018 to clarify the issue, but it has not been issued. So in our view, as long as you're in a taxable business and credit is available to the other location, it is better to treat it as a supply and charge GST. In the valuation part of our presentation, we'll be discussing that valuation is never an issue under GST for this because of a specific provision. So with this backdrop, unless you are dealing in an exempt business, it is better to treat it as supply and charge GST on the same. But legally, yes, it is not payable.
Thank you, Puneet. So I now move on to the next vexed issue, that is liquidated damages and toleration of an act. And lately, the government has been putting, or the department has been putting each and every toleration and every damages under the purview of the liquidated damages or toleration of an act under the service tax regime also, and under the GST regime as well. So under the service tax regime, this was a declared services. It was declared as a service under section 66D, and it was similarly worded as under GST. So GST has just borrowed that squarely similar entry. It says that to refrain from an act, to tolerate an act, is basically a supply of service. Now, in the case of North American Coal Corporation, the issue was essentially that there was a violation of an agreement, or there was a breach of an agreement or obligations of the agreement, which went under arbitration, which was going on, and the arbitral award was going to be passed in this case. Now, this arbitral award was in nature of compensation on an award for breach of the contract. Now, the taxpayer asked this question to the advance ruling, that whether this compensation shall be liable to GST as toleration of an act or not. The similar positions, similar factual matrix like compensation or damages were there in Goa Industrial Development as well, whereunder there was cancellation of a contract to allot SEZs, and Maharashtra State Power Generation too. Now, these advanced rulings have held that nomenclature cannot change the nature of consideration. So basically, they mean that each and every money value shall be considered to be a consideration, irrespective it is a compensation or a damage or any other amount. So we want to highlight here that the definition of service or supply uses the term for. So the activity shall be for another person. Now, for means there shall be a benefit that shall be accruing to the other person. Similarly, when we say compensation, it is a damage for a legal injury, or a damage, or it is for a loss. It is compensation for a loss, while consideration is for the benefit of the other person. So each and every amount cannot be termed as consideration per se, and therefore this rulings which says that these all compensation and in nature of damages shall qualify as toleration of an act seems to be apparently incorrect, based on the interpretation of the terms compensation versus damages versus consideration. Now, with this, we now move on to the next slide, which lays down certain principles under the erstwhile laws under service tax. And under service tax, the primary issue that revolved was basically notice pay recovery, which is in essence for termination of an early termination of an employment agreement, whereunder the employee leaves the company a little early without serving the notice period, and they need to pay certain compensation or certain in form of 1 month salary or 2 months salary to the employer. Now, the department raised the question that whether this recovery amount shall qualify as toleration of an act or not. So the CSTAT held that compensating employer is not a provision of service. This cannot be termed as rendition of service. Amount payable is a part of salary, and salary is not covered under the ambit of or the sweep of service tax liability. Therefore, there is no tax payable. So see, this is squarely contradicting to the earlier judgment that have been laid under the GST regime. Similarly, under Madhya Pradesh Kshetra Vidyut Vitran, penalty for delay was recovered for in performing the obligations of the contract, and then again it was stated that this is not a provision of service at all, and there shall be no tax payable on this. Similarly, in cane food industry, there was ex gratia compensation to a job worker who was promised certain amount of work. So when the work volume was not that much, there was ex gratia compensation that was awarded. So the tribunal held that this is compensatory in nature, and compensation and consideration cannot be the same thing. This is not for provision of any service, and therefore there shall be no service tax liability on the same. So the earlier laws basically lays down the correct position of law as of now. So with this, we now move on to our next topic, that is ocean freight. Before that, Puneet, do you have any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, so Saurav, because of this COVID-19, we can expect a lot of these commercial disputes due to delayed delivery of goods, delayed execution of projects, delayed rendition of services, and force majeure clauses will be repeatedly invoked between contracting parties. Earlier law clearly and correctly lays down the position that all these compensation, damages, etc., these are not towards service and no taxes payable. But again, our suggestion will be that if you are in a taxable position, then it is better to treat it as taxable, and the other person can take the credit. But yes, if it becomes a cost, then it can surely be litigated.
Yes, so we now move on to the next issue, that is ocean freight. Under the GST law, we'll see that there are two persons who are responsible and are being held responsible for any liability or any benefits. They are supplier and the recipient. And under ocean freight, this issue came up because of person liable to pay tax and who will be the person liable to pay tax. Whether any person apart from supplier or recipient can also be made liable to pay taxes or not. So the transaction happens in such a way that importer places an order to overseas supplier, and this is placed on CIF basis, that is cost, insurance and freight is all included within the invoice only. Overseas supplier has the responsibility to engage overseas shipping line. Shipping line provides services to overseas suppliers. So basically the exporter becomes the recipient and the overseas shipping line becomes the supplier. Now these goods reach India, and under section 5(3) of the IGST Act, basically it says that it forms the charging section and it provides that supplier shall be liable to pay tax, but power has also been granted to central government to notify services on which recipient shall be liable to pay tax. Now we'll see that central government has notified several services under reverse charge mechanism, and one of which is the overseas services provided by overseas shipping line to overseas suppliers, and importer has been made liable to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. So it is important to highlight here that who is the recipient in the instant case. Now recipient is the exporter in the instant case and supplier is the overseas shipping line. They both are located outside India. Can the notification make anybody other than recipient liable to pay tax? Now this ocean freight, leviability of ocean freight was challenged before the Gujarat High Court in the case of Mohit Minerals. And Mohit Minerals in Gujarat High Court held that this notification which is providing for this entry is unconstitutional for these reasons: that importer is not the recipient of these transportation services, as there is no contract with the shipping line only, there is no privity to contract, and they have not been agreed with the importer itself. Now mere termination of supply of goods India does not mean that provision of services has happened in India. Thirdly, that a notification, which is the delegated legislation, can it go beyond the parent statute? Parent statute, that means CGST Act provides only recipient to be liable, to be made a person liable to tax. Now importer is not the recipient, so can the notification go beyond the parent statute itself? It was held as ultra vires. The notification was held as ultra vires of the constitution. Now we'll note that CIF imports includes all the freight element also, and customs duty is paid on that, and this will lead to a double taxation if we also imply IGST and we also recover IGST at the end of the importer. So based on this levy of ocean freight was held to be unconstitutional. This is the right position of law, we believe, and the court has rightly held that this shall not be, the legislature will have to amend these mistakes. The judgments have been followed in by Calcutta High Court squarely, and they have not given any other reasoning. They are following Mohit Minerals only. Important to note that all these grounds might fall if there is a retrospective amendment which is in fashion by the legislature, and it might bring a retrospective amendment under section 5(3) to say that not recipient but any other person can also be made liable. So based on that, most of the grounds that had been upheld under Mohit Minerals judgment will fall. But yes, the ground of these supplier and recipient being outside India will still play its part, and still the judgment will hold true. And the similar view was also taken in Gujarat High Court by Sal Steel Authority in service tax as well. So in service tax also this provision has been held to be unconstitutional, while that an amendment was also made under law to include any other person to be person liable to pay taxes, but thereby correcting this amendment. So we can expect this happening in GST as well. So Puneet, you have any thoughts on ocean freight?
Nothing specific, Saurabh. I think you have rightly explained. So on merits, this judgment is totally correct, and we can expect a retrospective amendment soon. And again, just like other points, I'll continue to have the same view that unless you're in an exempt business, it is better to treat these as taxable and take credit of that rather than entering into dispute. But yes, if you're in exempt business or if you have some credit accumulation problem, you should surely litigate. Yeah.
Right. So we now move on to one of the another vexed issues, and this has again, it has had its fair share of disputes under service tax regime. It is slightly broadened also under GST regime when goods and services can together form a composite supply. Earlier it was only for services. Now it has been made applicable to goods as well. So composite supply is defined under the Act to mean two or more taxable supplies. So I'll emphasize on taxable supplies. So there shall be a taxable supplies only as per the provision, and these taxable supplies has to be naturally bundled, and it is another important parameter that has to be taken care of, and that should be in due course of ordinary course of business, and one of which is a principal supply. So most important aspect is there shall be two taxable supplies and they shall be naturally bundled. To the contrary, mixed supply is two or more individual supplies, and that has to be for a single price. And in any case, whatever is not composite supply shall form a mixed supply only. So before we move forward, we must highlight that this issue multiplies in composite supply versus mixed supply is because each and every contract or each and every transaction has to be evaluated separately, and there is no fixed parameter under law. Now there are certain parameters that were laid down by education guide. They are not exhaustive. They have been followed by the e-flyer that has been issued under GST. It says that the perception of consumer is of paramount importance, that what consumer is perceiving that transaction to be. Secondly, what is the industry practice in supplying that service or goods together? And thirdly, the third thing is incidental supply is merely for enjoyment of principal supply. So principal supply holds relevance here. So as I said, that each and every contract, each and every transaction has to be factually examined to reach to a conclusion whether it falls composite supply or mixed supply. So we'll move on to the specific cases under GST or by the advanced ruling authority that has been placed. So in Vista Marine and Hydraulics India, there was a repair service contract, and the contract was as well as for supply of spare parts. Actually, there was separate work order which was issued, and the values were separately indicated on invoices. Now, as per the consumer perception that we read in the last slide, every repair services assumes that there will be supply of spare parts too. Otherwise, there cannot be a proper repair of the particular machine in all cases. While that, so the advanced ruling held that each item is separately taxable. It said that it is not a composite supply, and it relied on circular dated June 8, 2018, which said that if the values are indicated separately in the invoice, then this will not form a composite supply. The correctness of this circular as well as the judgment is still in doubt, because writing in the value separately in the invoice shall not be indicative of anything which shall be conclusive of whether it is a composite supply or not. In a similar case in Sandvik Asia Rajasthan AAAR agreement, there were two agreements, one for maintenance of equipment and replacement of parts. Second was for supply of parts with replacement on request. In the first case, first agreement, it held that composite supply was naturally bundled because the consumer's perception was to avail it together, while the second agreement was held that this is a mixed supply of parts, and the contracts specifically say that it is a supply of parts only, and their replacement is only made on request. So this was held to be a mixed supply, which in our view seems to be an incorrect ruling also, because the supply of parts and the replacement was going hand in hand only in the entire transaction, and therefore there was this agreement should have formed a composite supply too. Now moving on, this is another important issue, switching AVO West Bengal AAR. It says that the issue was whether supply of UPS with battery for single price was happening. TAR created two categories. One was UPS which had this inbuilt battery, while there was another which UPS and standalone batteries. It was held that UPS and inbuilt battery should be considered as composite supply, but UPS and standalone battery should be considered as mixed supply. And this ruling seems to be prima facie incorrect. Why? Because when a customer goes to a shop, it may opt for a UPS with an inbuilt battery, or it may opt for a separate standalone battery itself. So it should be consumer's perception, which should be the indicative factor or the parameter on which composite supply shall be judged, and not whether this can be sold separately in the market or not. So we now move on to the next slide, that is Aditya Birla next judgment. There was a ex-works supply of goods and transportation services. Freight was separately charged on invoice. The question was whether this is a composite supply or not. The advanced ruling to the contrary held that charging freight separately on invoice will not be changing the nature of transaction. It will still remain composite supply. This will be artificial vivisection of the transaction itself, because this goes hand in hand only. The contracts are single source responsibility only. Therefore, it was held to be composite supply. Now, another ruling is in respect of supply of electricity in Keysight Technology International. There was supply of electricity through grids plus DG sets. So as I mentioned that two taxable supply shall normally form to be a composite supply. In this, supply of electricity through grids was basically an exempt supply, while through DG sets was an utility and was chargeable to tax. Now this AR held that these are not two taxable supplies. There is one exempt supply too. Therefore, it cannot hold to be a composite supply. At the same time, we must highlight here that what is exempt is firstly taxable. So taxability is decided by a parent statute, that is CGST Act. Exemption is granted by the central government through a delegated legislation. So what cannot be taxable, first of all, cannot be exempt also later. So every exempt supply can naturally be taxable first, and therefore this position that only two taxable supplies which are can form a composite supply seems to be incorrect on this premise. Similar ruling was there for maintenance services, which was chargeable to 18% GST, while supply of water was exempt, and this was happening by the latest developers, to the Resident Welfare Association. So it said that there were two contracts which were artificially bifurcated, and maintenance services always include supply of water also. Therefore, it is directly linked with each other, and it forms composite supply. So this seems to be a correct ruling to this regard, that two taxable supplies only cannot make a composite supply. One taxable, one exempt can also be made a composite supply in the GST law. So with this, Puneet, do you have any thoughts on composite supply and mixed supply?
Yes, Saurabh. So this is likely to be the most debated topic, and despite industry's several requests to give clear guidelines as to what is a composite or mixed supply. In fact, there are three types of supply: composite supply, mixed supply, and multiple supplies, where more than one supply which are distinct from each other are made by the supplier. But the government has not given any guidance. But to our rescue, there is sufficient foreign jurisprudence available on this topic. And very importantly, contracting and transaction execution makes a lot of difference as to tax treatment of this. Yes, Saurabh, we can proceed. Or this brings an end to your taxability part.
One last topic, Puneet. This brings us to works contract. We'll quickly cover this.
Sure.
So works contract was a concept which was introduced by Article 366(29) long back, and states were made eligible to tax these transactions. Under GST, it has a limited application. It says that contract for building, construction, fabrication, modification, etc. of any immovable property only has been considered to be works contract. And then again, transfer of property in goods shall happen, which is naturally the concept of works contract. Schedule 2 deems this works contract as composite supply of services, so there is no dispute on whether it will form goods or services. There is a bifurcation of contracts or not. Thirdly, the issue multiplies when the ITC restriction is also there in terms of works contract, except when it is for further supply of works contract also. So there were several questions by solar power plant installation companies which received contracts for solar power plant installations, and there were separate contracts for supply of goods, that is solar power plant related goods, which is chargeable to tax at a lower rate, and while the works contract services are chargeable to tax at the 18% rate. Now, in all these judgments, which have a few of them have also been affirmed by the appellate advance ruling, This says that this is only a contract for supply of services for executing overall contract, including provision of goods as well as services. And although this ruling seems to be correct legally, but yes, solar power plants have been intended to tax at a lower price, and India, as a matter of policy, is planning to shift on to solar energy. So this will definitely impact the solar companies. This was held to be a works contract. Now, secondly, there were certain contracts, certain cases where under there was a cross-fall breach clause. What is a cross-fall breach clause is if there are two contracts separately for supply of goods and services, and one contract fails, if there is no, if the satisfaction of the first contract is not fulfilled. So say supply of goods is not satisfactorily fulfilled, the services contract will also fail. So there was clauses like that. So the advanced rulings have held that this is a single source responsibility contract. It cannot be bifurcated. The bifurcation will be artificial only, and therefore it should be considered to be a works contract only. So with this, I come to an end of taxability part. Dharnen will be taking it forward through valuation as well as place of supply. So I'll be handing over the presentation to him. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Saurabh. Thank you, Puneet. So, as Saurabh rightly concluded on the taxability and has dealt with some of the elements of taxability, the next key element is valuation. So, as we are aware that Section 15 deals with valuation, and valuation of any goods or services is the value on which the rate is applied and GST is payable. Now, Section 15 provides for transaction value to be the value, and which is the price paid or payable for the supply, where supplier and recipient are not related, and price is the sole consideration. So when the parties are not related, price is sole consideration, that becomes the transaction value. There are certain additions and certain exclusions therein. And then the law also provides for excluding discounts in two situations where discount is already known, it is on the face of the invoice, or if not known, but it is established by way of an agreement, then also discount is available. So we'll deal with some of the cases and that have come, and this has been a very hot topic because a lot of litigation around it. First, we'll see what the industry practice is, and this is more prevalent in the white goods and FMCG industry. So discount is provided by a company to a dealer through a credit note. This credit note could be commercial credit note where no GST is passed, or it could be a tax incidence could be passed. I mean, it could be a GST credit note. Next, the company which is issuing the credit note treats adjusts the credit note towards the sale price, and therefore reduces its sale price through the credit note. Whereas so far as the dealer is concerned, dealer could adjust the credit note in its purchase price. Alternatively, dealers, we have seen, also book it as their income from other source as revenue item. Now, in this regard, for to deal with the circulars, to deal with the discount schemes, a circular came in March 2019 which dealt with secondary discounts in the sense which are not known at the time of supply, post supply, and they said that no such discounts will not be eligible for reduction. These need to be included for the purpose of paying GST. This circular was followed by another circular in June 2019, which created a lot of chaos and a lot of confusion. In the sense, it said that if there is no obligation on the dealer while giving the discount, then the discount will be eligible, provided it satisfies the conditions prescribed under Section 15(3). And those conditions are that the discount is as per the agreement and the scheme floated by the company. Second, that ITC on that discount has been reversed in case of a GST credit note. Next, it's also dealt with that in case the company puts an obligation on the dealer to undertake any activity. In such a case, the discount will not be eligible, and it has to be included in the value of consideration. And lastly, if the discount so offered reduces the price so as to increase the sales, there also they said that this will again be includable in the value of supply. So this circular, because there was a lot of hue and cry, and eventually in October 2019 itself, the circular was withdrawn. Having said that, it left a lot of scars, and the authorities issued a number of notices to various industry, especially the white goods and FMCG sector. We'll deal with some of the important cases which went before the authorities in this regard. Santosh Distributor is a Kerala advance ruling, where Santosh Distributor was an distributor of Castrol India. So the Castrol had some scheme floated where if Santosh were to make sales at reduced price to the dealers, then that reduced price would be reimbursed by Castrol through issuance of commercial credit notes. So this discount was prefixed as per the scheme, invoice value was reduced, and such discount was reimbursed by the manufacturer. Now, what the authority held is that discount was intended to augment sale, and therefore it will not be excludable. It has to be included. So what the authority said, supposing if 100 is the sale price from Castrol to Santosh, and Santosh sells those goods for 90 to its dealer, and Santosh receives 15 rupees of credit note from Castrol, then the value at which Santosh will need to discharge its GST liability would be 90 plus 15, which is 105, and not 90. So in our view, this is not a correct ruling because the scheme was there, it was always known, and this credit note benefit has to be given. GST has to be paid only on the value which Santosh charges from its dealer. Next is the Ultratech Cement. Here, there was no scheme or agreement in upfront, but Ultratech Cement was supplying cement to its dealers. And now what happens, because cement industry is the market fluctuates, and sometimes the dealer has to sell the cement at a price lower than its purchase price. In such a situation, because of the prevailing practice, Ultratech would reimburse the dealer through commercial credit note. And in this situation, the authority held, Maharashtra authority held that no, this will again the dealer will need to include the credit note value in its total value on which GST is payable. And again, in our view, this is not a correct ruling. Next, we take up Quality Mobikes. This is a Karnataka authority ruling. So Quality Mobikes was a dealer of Harley Davidson motorcycles. It was receiving discounts on two sides. One is the volume discount on purchase made from Harley Davidson. Second is the sale side in a turnover discount. And both these discounts were through commercial credit notes. The authority correctly held that these credit notes do not, the GST liability is not influenced by these, and these will be considered towards the value credit notes. Again, we take up the next ruling, which is in the case of MRF. In this case, what had happened, this is a appellate authority for advanced rulings. So earlier, the advanced ruling authority in the case of MRF for these very credit notes held that the ITC proportionate to the credit notes will not be eligible. So basically, what was happening in case of a cash purchase, certain discounts were being given as per the scheme. Now, because the section 16(2) provides that one of the condition is that one has to make the payment to the supplier to avail ITC. What the authority held, authority for advanced ruling held, is that there is failure to pay, and therefore, to the extent of short payment, ITC will not be eligible. The appellate authority reversed this and said that no, this is a commercial credit note, it does not have any influence, and there is no failure to pay because the discount has been extended to the dealer, and therefore ITC will be eligible. This is a correct ruling. Next, we take up Rule 28, which so in case the value is not able to determine as per the provisions of section 15, then the rules are prescribed which can be used to determine. And this is more so in the case of distinct or related persons, say entities of the same organization, branches, etc. So what rule 28 provides is that value should be either open market value, or the value of supply of goods, services of like kind and quantity. And if the same are not available, if the OMV or this value is not available, then as per rule 30 or rule 31, rule 30 prescribes for cost of production or manufacture or provision of service, and rule 31 is the deductive method. Rule 28 also has two provisos. First proviso says that if the goods are supplied as such by the recipient, then and if such goods are supplied to unrelated buyer, then take the value of that unrelated buyer and make supply to the related buyer at 90% of the price. Also, second proviso says that if the recipient is eligible for full credit, in that case, whatever the invoice value is, that will be deemed to be the open market value. So in this regard, a couple of advanced rulings that we have picked up here. One is the Specs Maker, which is Tamil Nadu Appellate Authority ruling, and GKB, which is the West Bengal advanced ruling. Now, in these cases, certain spectacle equipment, spectacles were being sold, and the issue was that when these spectacles were being transferred to the related distinct person, what value should be adopted. And so what these rulings held, and the Specs Maker earlier ruling, advanced authority ruling, was that no, it has to be one cannot adopt second proviso, which is the open, which is the invoice value, but one has to follow through the rules. Whereas the appellate authority put the correct position by saying that proviso to rule 28 gives the option to the taxpayer to follow either of the provisos, and in case there is no such requirement of sequential application, and in case the recipient is eligible for full credit, then whatever value is deemed fit, that can be taken up, and that will be treated as the open market value. Puneet, you have any thoughts on these valuation aspects?
Yeah, sure. So DK, firstly, on this dealer incentive issue, it is likely to be the most litigated issue on the valuation side, and there are four aspects relating to the issue. One is whether the discounts are deductible or not. Secondly, whether it constitutes a service from a dealer to the main company. Third issue is relating to whether discount constitutes to be additional consideration from end customer. And fourthly, whether the dealer is entitled for full ITC or not. And there is sufficient jurisprudence under old law also on many of these aspects. So, but yes, the government firstly issued an incorrect circular, then withdrew it. And if we see the GST Council's website, there is a draft circular which government proposed to issue to clarify all the issues, but which have not been issued till date. So, so we should expect that the government clarifies this issue once and for all. Otherwise, even in post GST, we have seen significant disputes already arising on this issue. Coming to the intersect unit point, again, Rule 28 proviso is very, very clear. So in case of either being stock transfer or when we were discussing supply between distinct person, as most of you will be in the business of taxable activities, you can take any value, and these provisos need not be applied sequentially. So it gives a total free hand to you to adopt any value, and other unit will be entitled for credit. Yeah, DK. Yeah.
Thank you, Puneet. And you're absolutely right. If we take, I mean, as you mentioned, and I distinctly remember, even in these cases, dealer discount cases, these credit note discounts in some cases under service tax regime were being treated as if provision of business support service or business auxiliary service, or even in cases after negative list regime, they were treating them as obligation to do an act, and somewhere or the other the authorities always seek to tax them. Yes, these issues are very complex and multiple issues. So okay, I'll come to the next. So this is another on distinct person only. So what Cummins India, Maharashtra advanced ruling, Cummins India had a head office and several branches, and they were all receiving common input services which they were availing, and they wanted to allocate these services to the respective branches. Now, question that they raise is one, because these are all part of the same entity, legal entity, whether these supplies or allocation would be construed as supply under GST law. Second point issue that they which the authority addressed, that yes, it is covered under Schedule 1. Clearly, it is a supply. Distinct persons are separately registered, and so there will be a supply. Second question they asked is whether they can use the nominal value for these transactions when they are making these invoices, raising invoices and cross-charging on the branches, whether nominal value can be used. Here, the authority held otherwise and said that no, nominal value cannot be used. Open market value needs, since open market value is absent, you have to follow Rule 30, which is the cost of provision of service. And lastly, they also asked whether ISD registration is required. Is it mandatory to cross-charge this common credit? Again, the authority held that it is mandatory as per Section 24. In our view, we are not in agreement with the last two. I mean, both. In our view, if the credit is available, full credit is available, then second proviso to Rule 28 can be followed. And also for ISD registration, when through invoice one can transfer whatever credit is there, then ISD should not be made mandatory. That is. So next we come to services to employees. Again, Schedule 3 clearly provides that employer-employee relationship and there is an exemption available. But what happens where employee providing services to employer is fine. Employer providing services to employee, like transportation, canteen services. So these are related persons, and what should be the open market value in such situations? So open market value, as we saw, has been defined as money value of such supply at same point of time, and where buyer and seller are not related, and price is the sole consideration. So whether the value if the employment agreement includes these services, transportation, canteen, etc., then no GST is applicable. It is part of the service contract, employment contract. However, if the employment contract is silent, then what should be the transaction value or the open market value? Second, lastly, if supposing there are contractual workers from whom similar prices are being charged, can those be adopted as the transaction value or open market value? So we'll see how to address these aspects. So for instance, in the case of parent rental insurance from employees, so what companies normally do is they recover full or part of the insurance from the employee, and what they essentially do, they procure insurance from an insurance company which is registered under IRDA, and then they provide. So in the case of Maharashtra AAR ruling, in the case of POSCO, and that was followed in Jyotin India also, Maharashtra AAR, authority held that this is not an activity because the company is not engaged, it's not registered under IRDA, it is not in the business of providing insurance, and therefore it is not, this activity is not in the course or furtherance of business of providing parental insurance. What it is doing is it is simply collecting recovering certain cost of insurance and paying it, passing it on to the insurance company, on which no GST is payable because it is not a supply. However, it also held that whatever GST which the insurance company will charge, this employer will not be eligible for ITC because it is not its business. It's not an input for it. So all the questions whether it qualifies as a supply, if so, what would be the value of payment of GST and eligibility to avail ITC, all these have been addressed in these rulings. This is correct ruling. Next topic we'll take up is a very interesting and complex topic, which is the place of supply. So we have seen place of provision of service rules under service tax regime, and those were where we were dealing only with India and outside India. Now with GST we have so many because each of the state or union territory is a separate territory which has its own revenue, and therefore we have each state movement from one state to another is also we have to determine what the place of supply is, and accordingly we have to pay taxes. If it is an intra-state supply within the same state, then central GST and state GST will be payable. If it is an interstate supply, then IGST has to be paid. Section 10 and 11 of IGST Act deal with the for goods, and section 11 and 12 of 12 and 13 of IGST Act deal with services. So we'll quickly deal with the first issue which came up was Kun Motors. So now what happened in case of Kun Motors company case is that there was a resident of Kerala who went to Pondicherry to purchase a car. He purchased a car, got a temporary registration of the car done, and thereafter he asked the dealer in Pondicherry, because it was an expensive car and he didn't want to drive all the way from Pondicherry to Trivandrum. So he asked the dealer in Pondicherry to transport the car to him in Kerala. While the car was being transported in a truck in Kerala, the authorities stopped it for want of e-way bill. And that is how this case started, and it went to Kerala High Court. What the High Court held is that the moment the car has been sold in Pondicherry, it is registered, it is delivered, the possession and control over the car and delivery has taken place, and now it becomes the property of the buyer. Also, the authority relied upon the Kerala High Court relied upon Section 10, which says that where the goods supply involves movement of goods, that was first. Second, whether by this movement of goods could be by the supplier or recipient or any other person, then the place of supply shall be the location where the movement of goods terminates for delivery to the recipient. So what this dealer had done, because he knew that the buyer is from Kerala, he charged IGST. But when the matter went to Kerala High Court held that no, this this transaction got completed, delivery got completed in Kerala itself, and thereafter it became the personal property of the buyer, and therefore the property transferred in Pondicherry, and it is not a case of IGST, but the dealer should have discharged CGST and SGST of Pondicherry. So place of supply is Pondicherry in this case, and since it is a personal goods of the customer, therefore there was no requirement for e-way bill. Next, there is a recent ruling, only yesterday it has come out, where this is in the case of Penna Cements. This is a Telangana AAR advanced ruling. Here the facts were that there was a buyer from outside Telangana who goes and purchases cement from a seller in Telangana. So Penna Cement is a manufacturer and he sells the goods on X factory. So X factory Telangana, the sale happens, and this buyer takes delivery, and then he transports those goods outside to his recipient, whatever that place is. In this background, what the authority held is that Again, the supply involving, we already saw what the provision is, and the authority held that supplier supplied goods to recipient at main gate, but the supply movement did not stop there. The movement, because the supplier knew that this buyer is from outside the state, and he would transport the cement to outside the state, and therefore he would arrange for transportation to his location in the state where he is registered. And that being the case, the movement continues till the location of the recipient, and therefore IGST needs to be charged, and even in X factory interstate supplies cases. Puneet, your views on this?
So DK, in my view, this is logically correct ruling, but legally it's incorrect, because the place of supply covers where supply involves movement of goods. But in this case, the supply happened at Telangana only, where the goods were delivered to the buyer. Thereafter, the buyer himself is taking. So it is not that the supply, which was sale of goods from seller to buyer, that was encompassing movement of goods. But yes, if we see overall purpose of GST law, which is destination based tax, ideally from a taxpayer's perspective, it doesn't make any difference, but it makes difference from state government's perspective, which state government will get the revenue. Ideally, if the goods are going outside Telangana, then the outside state government only should collect. So that's why I said that legally it's incorrect, because the provisions are not supporting this. But yes, logically it's correct. But the one important thing which is outcome of this ruling is that many of the companies are adopting this position in respect of ex-work supply on the logical grounds only, since the goods are moving outside the state. So at least to those companies, this will come handy. Yeah.
So can we logically interpret that, yes, if you are dealing with an end consumer who is not eligible for credit, even CGST, SGST or IGST, it doesn't make any difference. But when
Right.
you're dealing with a business to business, then and if you are aware that that other business or the buyer is registered outside the state and you have his address on the invoice, then one can charge IGST so that the credit issues are not there.
Yeah. So it's better to convert into either FOR or ex-works plus freight instead of delivering the goods at at seller's premises only.
Right. All right. So we proceed then. So next is supply of goods. Now, as we are aware that in case of imports, it is the location of the importer which is the place of supply. So in this context, we deal with couple of rulings. One is in the case of RL import and export, and the other one is in the case of Gandhar Oil Refinery. Now here, what was happening? Both of them were importing coal or coke or in some port state. Like Gandhar was importing in several states, whereas RL was importing somewhere in Orissa. And they were warehousing their goods, imported goods. They were both registered in Maharashtra, but they were warehousing those goods at the port warehouse itself. And from that warehouse, then they wanted to supply to the customers who were in the vicinity, whatever industry was there. And the question they posed before the authority was whether they need to be registered in the other states. That was one. Second, whether they can make supplies using their Maharashtra GSTN, and also whether they can use their Maharashtra GST in the e-way bill also. So both the rulings correctly held that importation at multiple ports, registration in Maharashtra. So the ruling correctly held that place of supply is the place where the importer is located, which is Maharashtra. And from Maharashtra, they can make supplies, they can store goods wherever the goods are stored, warehoused, from there the supplies can be made using Maharashtra GSTIN, and Maharashtra e-way bill, even the e-way bill can carry Maharashtra GSTIN, and no registration is required. Next is a case of export. So for export, as Customs Act also prescribes, and identical definition is there, that taking goods outside the country is what export is. So the place of supply is located outside India. In this context, there is a West Bengal AAR in the case of Sheraton Company. They had a contract to make certain supplies to ships and vessels which were anchored in India, or foreign going ships and vessels, and they were supplying goods stored in warehouse. They asked that, they wanted to treat this as export, and said that, they should be eligible for the exemption from GST. What the authority held, and this is correctly held, that export means taking goods outside, and therefore foreign going vessels which are anchored within India are not placed outside India, and therefore the supply cannot be outside India. It is within India, and therefore not exempt from GST. There is no export. Next, we come to this is a very interesting and yet little complex topic, which is performance-based services, where some usually these are in case where some tests have to be performed or research. So where there are place of supply has provisions for performance based, where certain services have to be performed on goods for which the recipient has to make the goods available. Now, this has been a subject matter of contention both under service tax place of provision of service rules, as well as where it used to be Rule 4A, and in GST also. So the issue here was that, especially when the case is very, very clear, like you give your shirt for dry cleaning, that is the subject matter on which services are performed, and matter ends. There is no dispute. But in case of research, development, etc., where so here the place of supply is the place where the services are actually performed. So couple of rulings, and then we will see what principles emerge and how we deal with them. So Bayer Hella Thermo Control India, they were this is a Maharashtra AR, and then Syngenta Bioscience, which is a Goa advanced ruling. So just one sec. So in the case of Bayer Hella, the foreign supplier was sending some prototypes, which was an associated enterprise of Bayer Hella. They were sending certain prototypes on which Bayer Hella India was performing certain tests, and was sending the prototypes were not returned, but only the test reports were sent outside India, and they approached the authority saying that, this is an export under section 13(2) of IGST Act. The authority held that what you are doing is providing services on the goods, and therefore the place of supply is in India under section 13(3)(a). So section 13(3)(a) of IGST Act says that if there are services performed in respect of goods, for which goods the recipient is required to make available for the provision of services, then the place of performance of such services shall be the place where the services are performed. So authority held that since you are providing services on prototypes which have been made available by your associate enterprise in India, and therefore you are liable to pay GST, these cannot be treated as export. Likewise, in the case of Syngenta, so in the case of Syngenta also, there was some technical testing was being done on goods, and goods were not returned. The authority held that these services do not qualify as export, as the place of supply is in India. the goods were in the nature of agrochemical products on which some research development was being done. Now, another was Cliantha research, where some clinical trial drugs were there. So these medicines were supplied by associate enterprise free of cost, and these were administered into some volunteers in India, and then they were examined, what outcome the test reports were there, and those reports were sent to overseas entity, and these were again being held that these are all the test reports are not relevant. It is what is relevant is that you provided services on goods, and therefore place of supplies in India. Now, these rulings, we do not think these are correct because, and of course, facts of each case will vary. But in most cases, what the outcome is, it is not the goods per se. The subject matter of service is not the goods. What the foreign party expects, what is the transaction that they are expecting some report based on which they can these are for research development purpose. They are expecting some outcome where they can improve on their research. These are all, for instance, I'll give you an example. Like there are market research cases. If you are your service recipient provides you goods and which you free of cost, which you distribute with people, and then you market, survey, and then you send your report. Those cases, they consider that these are not services in relation to goods. If that be the case, then here why these services are treated as being in relation to goods, and why these goods or these prototypes, etc., or these drugs become the subject matter of service. That is not correct. So I'll ask Puneet. Puneet, what is your view on these issues?
Yeah.
Or should I cover one? Should I cover
yeah, you can cover the next slide also. Yeah.
All right. I will. So just I'll cover one more, and then I will ask for Puneet's view. So service tax law also, these issues were there. However, service tax position, except one judgment of Sai Life Sciences, where also the drugs were being sent from outside, and those were administered, and the reports went, and there the CSTAT held that no, the place of supply is in India, because the performance has been done on goods in India. Services are in respect of goods. Otherwise, the same very Sai Life Science has a favorable ruling also, and what there is a ruling on Adnis Therapeutics, again on drugs, that goods cease to exist. Services are not provided in respect of goods. That is what the CSTAT held. In Sai Life Sciences second ruling also, the same position was there, that the certificates or SGS India also, this is a High Court ruling, where it has been held that after testing, the test report is sent outside. It is the test report which is the culmination of service, and which is the requirement of the foreign party. Goods are just the means. Whatever simulations, whatever experiment, or whatever tests are performed on those goods are not relevant. Those goods get destroyed. Therefore, these goods are not relevant, and these services will be treated as export only. So, Puneet, your thoughts on these? I mean, the jurisprudence around this issue.
Yeah. So DK, this old jurisprudence is absolutely correct, because when a R&D etc. is done, these are not in respect of such goods. So it's basically a service only. So it should be treated as export of service. And just one small announcement to all participants. Actually, we had a lot of content for today. That's why we are already at 4:30. So we are just coming to the last topic, which is intermediary. And then we have some questions which we'll take. So please bear with us for a bit longer session today. Yeah.
I'll try to be a bit quick. Okay. So next is the issue of intermediary services. And again, a very hot topic, and almost every exporter is facing it, because their export treatment gets denied because of these issues. Now, marketing and promotion, back office, back end support service, and all these are taken. So what intermediary means? Intermediary means a broker, agent, or any other person by whatever name called, who is engaged into arranging or facilitating a supply. It requires the presence of third party. It excludes services on own account. So if one is providing services on own account, then definitely it is not, he's not an intermediary. But if he is arranging, facilitating supply of services, then he will become. Place of supply will be the location of the supplier. So we have multiple advanced rulings, Sabre Travel Network, Toshniwal Brothers, We Serve Global, Mans Marine Cargo. So all of them were providing, engaged into providing marketing, promotion, and also in some backend office support. In some cases, they were engaged in identifying the customers. In some cases, they were not. They were in some cases dealing with the customers also in some form or shape. They took different grounds. In some cases, they said these are after sale services, we are not engaged with the main sale. But having said that, because we are short on time, I can discuss, because these are all very fact specific, and the scope of services that they undertook are varied, and we have to see the facts of each case to understand whether which case is correct, which is incorrect. But what the authority held clearly is that they are all involved, engaged in arranging, facilitating services, and therefore they qualify as intermediary, and their services do not qualify as export, and they are all liable to pay GST. Now we'll come to again in market research. So there are a couple of judgments. One is Fulcrum Info Service, Karnataka AR, and then Asahi Kasei, which is Karnataka Triple AR. These were favorable because they said that these companies, based on their facts, they were also providing back-end office support, like Fulcrum was providing all the trade communication and handling all the import-export documentation and different things they were doing. Asahi was also engaged into a lot of these activities. What they said is that they are not directly dealing with the customer of the foreign party. So they were themselves providing the services on their own account, and were not facilitating or arranging services for any third party, and therefore a favorable ruling was given in these two cases, qualifies as support service only and not an intermediary. We'll also see the position under the old law, which is the service tax law. This has been a contentious issue. So Verizon India case, CSTAT held that requirement of third party is necessary. So you have to necessarily, there has to be a three party, and you identify, you facilitate, you negotiate, you enter into deal with that party, and you provide services. So then you will be intermediary, not otherwise. Likewise, in the case of Lubrizol Advanced Materials, CSTAT again held that intermediary you form only when your service is ancillary to the main service which the foreign party is providing. If you have no role in fixation of price or negotiation with the clients, and the foreign party is directly supplying, then you do not qualify as an intermediary. Last but not the least, it is the GoDaddy India Web Services. This is advanced ruling under the service tax regime. So this has more value for the simple reason that, unlike as Saurabh rightly mentioned, that only revenue officers giving the ruling, and that too of a very junior level. Here a Supreme Court judge, retired judge, was presiding, and three-member bench passed this ruling. They clearly said that the services that are being provided are support services. Whatever services are being provided by Indian entity to foreign entity were on own account, and therefore these are not in the nature of intermediary services. So Puneet, your views, and I think this is the last slide, and then your views on this issue, and then
Sure,
Yes.
sure, DK. So yes, you rightly mentioned that this intermediary also, the government issued a circular again, which was incorrect, which was withdrawn. They were supposed to issue another circular to clarify the correct position. And the old law lays down right principles that a third party needs to be present, and if the supply of goods happens to be on main account, on your own account, then it will not be qualify as intermediary. With this, we come to the end of this session, and our next webinar will be on June 19th. We again thank you for joining in that large number. And in the next webinar, we'll be covering ITC refunds, adjustment provisions, interests, e-way bill, on which a lot of issues are there, and other advanced rulings on some procedural issues. So DK, I'll just quickly take up the questions also.
Sure, please.
Yeah. So one question we have from Mr. Dayanand Yadav, Avery Denison. The question relates to availability of EPCG and project import. So Mr. Dayanand will take it offline with you because it's not related to this topic. Neelam Yadav, SS Kothari, you have some question relating to penalties, etc. Ma'am, you pose this question in the next webinar. We'll address that. Mr. Chandrasekhar Sharma from Godfrey Phillips, the question is, can we say as a thumb rule that in case of bill to ship to, the place of supply will be bill to location only? So Mr. Chandrasekhar Sharma, yes, your understanding is correct. The bill to location in all cases qualify as place of supply. Then we have some questions from Mr. Deepak Lohia. First two questions relate to transitional credits. First question is additional credit eligible due to revision of return. Department says refund should be given. Sorry, department says that you should have taken in GST Tran 1. And the second issue is some invoices found after filing of revised return, credit appearing, can be claimed as vested right in terms of refund, but department says no provision to allow refund. So Mr. Deepak, on both these points, in our view, department is right in saying that there is no provision for refund. So in our view, this brand Equitas judgment comes very handy for you. So you can file a revised Tran 1 either electronically or manually. That's the only way in which you can get this money back. Refund will not be available to you. The next question we have from Mr. Paras Kukareja. If recipient is eligible for ITC, can they charge ₹1 in the invoice? So Mr. Paras, this will apply only in case of distinct persons, means when you're stock transferring goods to other location or related parties. Otherwise, this is not a generic rule that any value can be accepted if recipient is entitled for credit. Next question we have is again from Mr. Paras Kukareja. Whether book provided with inbuilt audio system instrument is a composite supply. So Mr. Paras, I understand that this book is like a user manual, etc. So yes, it will indeed be a composite supply of the audio instrument only, and it will be taxed as part of the main value of audio instrument. We have a question from Neetu Sukhwani, whether it's possible to have composite supply of non-taxable supply and taxable supply, example buffet dinner per packs including alcohol, which is not liable to GST. So Miss Neetu, it's not possible because the definition of composite supply is 2 or more taxable supplies. So in this case, composite supply concept will not apply. Then we have question from Mr. Deepak Lohia, whether composite supply concept applies when import of service from foreign vendor. The reason is that foreign vendor is not taxable person. Composite supply definition uses the word taxable person. So Mr. Deepak, your understanding is correct. The composite supply will not apply, composite supply concept will not apply in case of import of service because of this unique definition. Then we have question from Mr. Sanjeev Mehra. On corporate cost allocation, is it advisable to have an agreement between HO and branches? So Mr. Sanjeev, as we discussed that the valuation is never an issue, and you can adopt any value for the cross charge. So to that extent, whether you have an agreement or not does not matter. But yes, if you're going on actuals, then even the agreement is necessary, and then you should have a proper methodology to allocate the costs. So this is the last question we received for today, and we again thank you for joining, and we look forward to see you again on June 19th on our second webinar in this series. Yeah, thank you everyone.